Alright, this presentation for you is discussing the PC system in relation to one of our main three energy systems that we've looked at. So I'll talk about the characteristics of this system and how it actually works to help us produce ATP. I'm going to talk about it as the PC system. Most of the time your exam style questions, it'll say the ATP PC system. It is talking about the same thing. I just don't want you to get confused with ATP resynthesis, so I just call it the PC system. Other things that could be referred to are phosphocreatine system, or the creatine phosphate system, or the CP system. All of these things are perfectly fine and it all means exactly the same thing. Key things that you need to know about this system: it is our most rapid system for producing ATP. It does rely on muscular stores of PC to be able to help with resynthesis of ATP. And because it is stored in the muscles, that's going to help us with quick ATP production. PC stores, the fuel that we use in this system is actually stored in limited quantities. So that's a downside to this system. It means that we can't use it for an extended period of time like we can our aerobic glycolysis system. When PC is broken down, so when the fuel is broken down, we have energy released, which helps us resynthesize ATP, and inorganic phosphate is also released, which is also used to help resynthesize the ATP that we need for muscle contraction. So a reminder of our process of ATP breakdown and resynthesis: we start off with this adenosine triphosphate, which is our thing that we require to break down for our muscles to be able to contract. And it's this chemical bond here that is broken down that creates that source of energy that our muscles need to be able to contract. So when we break down that ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate, that's what allows our muscles to contract. And then we need to then resynthesize ATP. So we need to essentially put these back together so that we can get back to our starting point of ATP. The PC system, its role is to provide energy for this resynthesis to occur. So the creatine phosphate is broken down, so we break this high energy bond, and it's that when that energy is released and when this phosphate is released, that allows us to use this ADP and recreate the ATP. Then we have that ATP available for muscle contraction, and you can see that this is a continual cycle. Okay, so our creatine phosphate, it plays a role in the fact that it provides the energy required to resynthesize ATP so that we can then have muscle contraction occurring. So it's that continuous cycle that we're looking at. The reason we use this system, our muscles have about 2 to 3 seconds worth of ATP ready to go stored in our muscles. So beyond this point, we actually need to generate ATP. So we resynthesize ATP using this system because we break down that PC fuel, which gives us the energy required to resynthesize that ATP. This allows us to sustain maximal exercise for approximately 10 seconds. So if we're working at maximal intensity, we can rely on this energy system for about 10 seconds. Beyond that point, it becomes a very weak system in terms of ATP production. And the issue with this system is that our PC stores, we can only recreate that fuel with a passive recovery, so doing very little muscle contraction, so whether it's sitting down, lying down, standing still, those sorts of things. So after 10 seconds of maximal work, we then have to rely on other energy systems to provide more ATP for our muscles to be able to work. So this system is great for that short duration, high intensity work at the start of exercise, but it's quite limited in terms of how long we can use it for. Okay, so we have a very limited amount of energy that we can use via this system. So if we are looking at relying on this system for energy production, we say that we have a small yield of energy that's possible through this system, because for every PC fuel that we break down, we would probably get close to 1 ATP per molecule. Technically it's 0.7, so it's a very low yield. But because we're just breaking down that simple chemical of PC, so there's just one bond that we need to break down, it's a very simple chemical reaction to get the energy required to generate ATP. So we can actually produce ATP at a very rapid rate when we use this system. And that's really important if we're looking at high intensity, explosive, short duration activities in sports and different activities and events. Because of this low yield and high, very rapid rate of ATP production, we do rely on this system predominantly during those short duration, high intensity activities. Easiest one is a 100-meter sprint. The challenge will be to think about when we rely on it during team sports. So it needs to have prior to it some sort of rest. Okay, so if we are looking at relying on this system, there needs to be a rest of about 3 minutes beforehand to be able to use this system predominantly throughout intermittent sports like netball, basketball, soccer, etc. When our PC stores are about 50% depleted, so about 5 seconds of maximal activity, it starts to lose how powerful it is, and we are more predominantly getting more ATP from our anaerobic glycolysis system. So the duration that we can predominantly use this system is about 10 seconds, but it does become weaker from about the 5-second mark. So in terms of the characteristics of this system, we use it's at its most powerful at the start of exercise. And very quickly it starts to lose its power, which is why we can only rely on it for about that 10 seconds. We use it during maximal intensity work, so looking at that 95 to 100% of our maximal heart rate. So it's working as hard as we can, which we can only do at the start of exercise, or if we've had that as appropriate rest beforehand. The only fuel that we can use via this system is PC. Because it is such a simple fuel, it means that we can have a very rapid rate of ATP production. So it's a very fast system to be able to use, and it's explosive in terms of how much ATP we can produce quickly. In terms of the yield of this system, we're looking at 0.7 ATP per fuel that we break down. So it's very limited in terms of how much ATP we're actually getting from this system. So it's very much a short-term solution for energy production. The byproducts that we produce in this system, we produce inorganic phosphates and ADP. And the research is out a little bit, and they're still trying to figure out why these are fatiguing, but they are fatiguing byproducts. They seem to think that the inorganic phosphate in particular, it starts to interfere with calcium release, which then affects our muscle contractibility. So it's not something that you need to know about from a Year 12 PE point of view, but do understand that these are actually fatiguing byproducts, and that you do need to know that for a Year 12 PE point of view, that we do have these fatiguing byproducts produced via this system. In terms of limiting factors, the biggest limitation of this energy system is the fuel. Okay, we don't have much of this fuel available, so it's stored in very small quantities, and that's the limitation of terms of how long we can rely on this fuel for. If we're looking at how long it takes for this system to be able to recover so that we can rely on it again, if we have a 30-second passive recovery, we can regenerate about 70% of our PC stores, which is great in terms of that repeated explosive movements that we could possibly do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at fatigue and recovery a little bit later in the outcome. If we have a 3-minute break or 3-minute recovery, we can recover 98% of our fuels. And the really important thing about this recovery rates, those percentages, it's based on if we've actually depleted all of our PC stores. If we've done a 3-second maximal explosive movement, such as a run and jump for something, we don't need that full 3 minutes to get a 98% recovery. Okay, it'll recover much quicker because we haven't actually depleted all of our stores. So in terms of the duration that we can predominantly use this system, we're looking at that 10-second mark, that those types of activities do rely heavily on this system for energy production. So that should give you a quick summary in terms of what you need to know in regards to the characteristics of this energy system.